Okay, so today we're discussing the findings of Menlo Security's recent ransomware research report. And I guess it'd be good to understand, was there a main headline finding as to how bad or how good things are? Just what was the obvious thing that it discovered?
Well, I think kind of as you look at the main themes, and I don't think there was too much surprise in the main themes, is that as you look at ransomware and malware attacks, they continue to come. They continue to come in waves. I think that the frequency with which companies are getting hit by these might be the surprising piece of how many was happening on a weekly, daily basis, multiple times per day. So I think it's kind of showing signs that there's no real sign of anything slowing down. And if anything, it's really going in the opposite direction. And so as organizations, as individuals out there in the world, because obviously we're coming up to shopping time and, everything and Cyber Monday and all of that stuff going on, that individuals need to be very aware of what's happening and how they communicate and who they can communicate to and what they give in terms of their details and their personal information. And then as organizations and companies, they need to make sure that they are really starting to pay even closer attention to what's going on, because again, it's not going to slow down. And if we keep looking at security in the same way as we have in the past, then I think we're going to run into even more of these issues as we get into 2023 and beyond.
Okay, and I think I'm right in saying one of the things the report did discover was that the attackers, the ransomware folks, are getting smarter. They're using more advanced technologies, and I think there was something you referred to as heat. So, I mean,
Yep.
Whether that's the main thing, but if you can tell us what heat is and any other sort of things to be aware of in terms of how much more clever these folks are getting.
Yeah, absolutely. So HEAT is an acronym because in cybersecurity, we need just one more. And so HEAT, HEAT, stands for highly evasive adaptive threats. And it's really a way of classifying threats around their characteristics and their tactics, but looking specifically at the security tech stack, the security elements that we have in place, and how the attackers have crafted these attacks to get around it. Because realistically, looking at going to an organization perspective, looking at that network perspective, looking at your end users going out to the web or to email or anything else, not a whole lot has changed in quite a long time. And as you look at the threat actors, these are very smart people out there. And so we've given them a decade or more to figure out, how do I get past my URL reputation, my sandboxing, my threat intelligence integration? What is it that you can do to get through? And so the term might be newer in terms of heat, but some of the tactics that are in there are actually just tried, tested, and true. And if they keep working, then they're going to keep using it. And what we've seen is that they're actually amassing more heat attacks, more techniques that will get through a traditional technology stack. And so they have more weapons in their arsenal, as it were, to start throwing at their victims. So some could be really simple. It could be as simple as putting a password on a file before you download it from the web, because your sandbox therefore cannot look at it. It doesn't know the password. So you have a business decision to make at that point. Do I let it through or not? So I've just got past your sandbox just by putting a password on an archive file or a PDF, whatever it might be. But we've actually seen a lot more elegant ways of getting past, and I'll use the sandbox as the example in this story, just because that's kind of, I think, probably the newest technology that's been adopted en masse on the network side of things. So we've seen a massive increase in what's called HTML smuggling. So rather than downloading a file all at once, where it will go to your sandbox, it will look at it, hopefully figure out it's malicious, hopefully stop it. Go, what if I break this up into different chunks, just 4, 5, 6 different data blobs? And when I download each one of these simultaneously and it goes through your sandbox, I don't know the file type, so I can't do anything with it. It doesn't look like it does anything, so I let it go through. And then when it gets to the victim on the other end, JavaScript within the browser will stitch all of these things back together, and your malicious file just got straight past all of the protections that were in place. Now, that description is just a download accelerator. So if you, back in the days, maybe of downloading an operating system file or a very big file, you wouldn't just download it all in one one go from one place, we split it up. So it's using that legitimate technology, but using it for a way that that will get past technology and get past the security. And so I think that's kind of one very big example. I think the other big thing that we've seen in terms of looking at building websites that host malicious content. Again, you go back to what used to be done. It used to be, I register a domain, I put my malware on it, I point people to it and hope that they click and hope that they download. Now that's not going to work. And so as we look at the evasive piece of this, what we've seen threat actors doing is actually amassing a supply chain of websites that they can use to deliver their malware when they choose to. And this starts to get on the borders of the ransomware as a service or malware as a service. So if I register a domain, I populate it with content and I leave it for 3 months, 6 months, a year, that's now a reputable website. It's now in the correct category. It's not seen as anything malicious at all. And then when I need it, I can put the malware on there and I have a window of opportunity where I know I'm going to get past the URL reputation and the other web controls that are in there. So I can get that malware down. And once I do that, it's disposable. I throw that away and move on to the next one. So they're building out that supply chain so they can just keep going, knowing they're going to get past that technology. And so it's really, again, some of the new ways of evading and being more adaptive to get past those technologies that we look at in terms of these heat attacks and the level of increase that we've seen out there in terms of the threat actors using these types of attacks.
Okay, and in terms of the weak links, I mean, one thing I think you've outlined there, that obviously if the ransomware folks are getting smarter, they are maybe, you know, cleverer than the security teams, or they're certainly, you know, shall we say, more knowledgeable than them at any given time. But also we come back to, I think you highlighted that people, you know, employees are still a weak link, because I guess they're still, you know, intrigued when something arrives and they'll just press something and lo and behold, all hell breaks loose or whatever. So just, yeah, a little bit about the weaknesses. I mean, are you surprised they still exist, or just thoughts on that?
Well, I think from looking at the attacker side of things, they have the luxury of time. So they aren't reacting all the time to things that are coming into them, so that they can actually think about the problem. They can figure out what is it that I need to do to get through? How do I get past that? So I wouldn't necessarily say they're smarter, but they just have a completely different playing field that they're playing on in terms of what they're trying to do. And I think from a practitioner perspective, I think the key thing is that if we keep doing the same thing, we're not going to see anything different. Like, nothing is going to change. There's been a big reliance on technology, on detection technology, so detection, remediate, and that really, I think, it might be good enough, but it's always going to fail. And so I think as we look at some of the new frameworks, the new technologies that are coming out around switching from detection to prevention, I think that's going to be the key for the security team to try and level the playing field. And going to your point about the end users always clicking, there is always going to be that one person that no matter what you do or say or ask is going to keep going. One thing I don't subscribe to, and I've read this in many articles, is the fact that the end users are the problem, because I don't think that we should say that the victim is the issue. Absolutely, we can help them, and we should help them in doing what they need to do, and hopefully making the right choice the lion's share of the time. But I think security teams really need to work with end users in terms of don't expect perfection. You're never going to get it. That's what the rest of the technology is designed to do. But the more we can do with them, the more that we can help them. Again, not only for the company and the organization they work in, but when they go home and they're doing their Christmas shopping, we want them to think the same way as well, to protect their credit card details and everything else that goes on there. So I think it really needs to be a balance between the technology and the awareness and training and everything else that goes on. And to make one additional point, just going back to the previous question on that shift from detection to prevention, I think if companies look to make that shift, then when you have that person that will always fall for the email, whatever it might be, for a phishing attack coming through, then that level of prevention that's in there can actually back that person up and go, you know what, if you did click on it, it's okay, because I've got your back. That's not going to go through. You're not going to get infected. The world is not going to end.
Okay, and I mean, you've touched there on the importance of the education and awareness, and I'm just wondering, the example you gave a couple of questions back about, if you like, a website being set up, it's completely innocent for months or even a year. Is there any way? Are there any telltale signs for people interact while it's sort of sleeping away, if you like, in the background, or is it only when the malware is sort of added to the mix that people can then actually work out what's going on? So how, I suppose what I'm saying is, how much can awareness spot, or are you always slightly vulnerable just because these, as you say, these people have a different time frame and they'll invent something that no one else has sort of bumped into before, so it's a while until people realize there's a new way of doing things?
You've described the problem beautifully there, right, in terms of why we're looking at these heat attacks, because realistically, until the malware gets deployed or pointed at the end user in whichever way they're trying to get to it, that website is entirely innocent. It is just a website about whatever topic has been put up on that domain, music, news, whatever it might be. And that's where awareness is not going to help, because you're not going to warn somebody about a website that is fine. But then I think that's where the technology backing it up needs to come in to go, you know what, as and when this thing switches, I need to be able to, again, using the word prevent that malware from coming down rather than trying to detect it as quickly as possible, and try to eliminate that window of opportunity for the attacker to get that piece of malware into my organization or an endpoint or whatever it might be at that point.
And in terms of sort of helping build that process as effectively as possible, I think multi-layered defense you talk about, and the 3 Ps. So if you can say a little bit about each, which is, I think, policies, protocols, protection, just as an approach.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of looking at cybersecurity and improving the security posture of an organization, it absolutely needs to go well beyond technology. I think we look a lot at what can I buy, what does it stop, therefore what's the outcome, and that's certainly one facet. So looking at the protection piece of the 3 Ps, yes, we need to do that. Yes, we need to shift to a different mindset in terms of prevention, but you also need to figure out, and you need to define, and you need to practice, what else do I do? So if something happens, who do I tell? How do I communicate this? What's my first step? What's my outcome going to be? How long will it take me to get back to normal operating procedure? So you need to do that and actually know that ahead of time. In the worst case, am I going to pay the ransom? It is much easier to figure that out when you do not have a ransomware request sitting on your screen. You can actually have the conversation, get the leadership team of an organization together to figure out, do we have the right insurance? When do we, at what point do we say yes? At what point do we say no? And then hopefully it never happens. But if it does, then the answer is already there about what we're going to do, and everyone can just move on. So I think it's definitely around the protection and the technology. It's definitely around the procedures, the protocols about what do I do. And then when it comes down to policy, I think really that's a business and a security decision. I do think that the more antiquated way of policy, as in looking at this as security policy, of just allow or block, is part of the problem, because going back to heat, the whole goal is to, if I can get out of that block category and into the allow category, then as an attacker, I win. So I think we need to kind of bolster that and say allow but. So in the world of Menlo Security, we consider that in terms of isolation. It's like, well, you can go to the website, but I'm going to isolate that so that if there is any active content coming back down, I'm going to stop that from getting to the end user. And then from a policy perspective, you have another arrow in your quiver, as it were, in terms of what you can do to enable the end users to do what they want to do and do their job and have access to the resources, but do it in a way that is still secure.
Okay, and there's been a focus, I can't remember, it's a couple of years now, but zero trust sort of arrived on the scene as, I won't say the sort of, the magic potion but at least it was a different, perhaps a slightly different way of approaching things. Do you think it has been helpful? And again, to what we discussed earlier, despite, I mean, clearly if it is helpful, great to use it, but it still has certain limitations because of what you've described earlier, that these people are pretty clever and there's always something new that you haven't thought about until you bump into
right.
it.
I certainly think it's a step in the right direction. I do think, to the couple of points I've made about shifting the mindset, that it does start to go, it doesn't start with everything and then scale back. It starts with nothing and then adds what it is you're allowed to do. I think that the issue with zero trust is that it's very ethereal. It's a mindset, it's an idea, and how you apply it is up to an individual organization, and how things get implemented is up to an organization about what they do or what they don't. But I do think that looking at how you implement security policy and everything else in a way where you start with nobody has access to anything, and then starting to figure that out is absolutely the right thing to do. We take that principle and I'll use websites as the example, but we use exactly that same principle when an end user accesses a website. We assume that it's malicious. If I treat every single website as if it's malicious, then the chances of anything coming through are a whole lot less than treating everything as if they're good, unless I can prove that there's something bad there. And so it is all about minimizing that window, minimizing that chance that something malicious will come down. And the trick from our perspective is, so how do we do all of that without impacting the end user experience, the action of the website, the activity, and whatever it is you expect to do. And then that really comes down to the technology side of where do you develop your product and actually what is really important, because end users are smart. And if you give them something that is tangible in terms of security, that this doesn't feel right, you're trying to do something, they will work around it. But if you make something that's invisible and they don't feel it, they don't see it, then they have absolutely no reason to try and circumvent it. They just get on with their day.
And in terms of we're in a cost of living crisis, I guess, and whether that's private individual, but to this conversation, companies, I guess, will be examining budgets, wondering where they can shave off costs, etc. And clearly they will have all manner of priorities for spending, but just how important is it that they do maintain or even increase security, as opposed to say, well, we'll park that for now? I mean, can you survive like that, or do you must make sure that you're continuing to spend the right amount on security, otherwise you are opening yourself up too much?
Well, I think the environment that we're in right now is, in my professional career, there's certainly been nothing like it in terms of an economic downturn combined with the security threat. So I think in years prior, we reached this financial standpoint, and cybersecurity then starts to be we can do with less. It's considered the insurance policy, the just in case, but today it absolutely should not be considered in that way. And I think a lot of organizations are starting to realize that no matter what they do, what industry they're in, how big or small they are, the fact that their data is important to them means that they are open to something like ransomware or having data stolen, released on the internet, and so paying much closer attention to, I need to maintain the security posture that I have. I should not take a weaker stance. Back to the point that if we think a little smarter, if we don't just go, I'm going to do more detection, more of the same thing I've been doing, and make that shift in mindset, whether it's from a zero trust perspective, whether it's from detection to prevention, then we can start to actually say, well, you know what, I can spend a little bit less and I can be a whole lot more secure. And that's exactly the equation that businesses want to get in this financial situation.
Yeah, and smarter spending. One of the things I think you mentioned is about isolation pad security. So is that a generic term, or is that something that's specific to Menlo Security? Can you just give us a bit of info on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So isolation and isolation technology, isolation security is a widely adopted term in the industry, looking at how you can put in place a point of control, policy, security between an end user and the website. Again, to repeat what I said earlier, I think the key thing in this is that, or the two things, is that number one, this is taking a preventative stance and doing that on at scale, at mass. This is not just for what is perceived to be risky, or it should be for a much broader set of content, because coming back to heat attacks, that website looks just fine. So why would I isolate it? Go, well, you should, because we actually see a whole lot of attacks coming from reputable websites. You need to be able to look at that. So there's the broad and the at scale, and then there's the end user experience piece, that if you search for restaurants near me, I need to give you restaurants near you. I need to know where you are. If you want to click to copy something on a website, I should support that. If you want to book a flight somewhere, I need to be able to do all of that, but do it in a way that's isolated and secure. So I think it's a broad term. I think it's something that's underused potentially at the moment in terms of adoption. But if the cybersecurity landscape keeps going the way it is and the uptick to the right, then I think honestly, the whole world will be forced into a new way of thinking. Otherwise, we're going to be on the losing side of a game that we didn't want to play in the first place against the attackers.
And also, I think the report highlights that tighter integration. So I'm guessing that means, I mean, you'll probably know better than I. Our last count, there were well over 100 different sort of security solution categories, and I mean, assuming you don't have the budget to buy all of them, in any case, there'd be massive overlap. I guess that is the key, is to getting enough. So there may be the odd bit of overlap, but obviously that's wasting money if there's too many products do the same kind of thing. So is there a sort of optimum? Clearly, it depends on what we discussed earlier, the importance of security and the size of the organization budget. But yeah, cut long story short, what does an integrated security solution look like, or how do you go about achieving it?
Yeah, well, so I think there's a few things in here. So we spoke about the financial status, and kind of looking at how do we do more with less and think smarter and everything else. And there are certain thoughts out there that the answer to that is consolidation, and potentially massive consolidation, that rather than these 10 different solutions I have today, I can consolidate that down to one, or one vendor at least. And I think there are massive issues with that, because it sounds right in your pocketbook, right? And we're giving a lot less money out. But realistically, if you want to get a lot of different types of security from a single vendor, or maybe even from two vendors, then you're going to start making compromises. You're going to start going, well, I'm really good here, I'm okay here, I'm not very good here, and you have to be okay with that rationale. But with the way things are going, with cyber threats increasing, I'm not sure that's the right way to be thinking about security. It wins for the accounting department, not for the security team that's still going to have to be figuring everything else out. So when we look at integration, I think it's very much a case of making sure that you make the most of you make informed investments, and you make the best and the most out of every single one. So if you have a different vendor for your web than your email, they should at least integrate together. Can I tie all of this threat intelligence, pull it over here so I can see what's going on, or maybe be able to manage what's going on from my endpoint detection solution and pull that out with everything else to wherever else it might be, a SIM, a Splunk, or anything else that might be on the network. But really saying, how do I maximize my security, but do it in a way where I'm not just going to kill my security team by giving them 30-point products with different management interfaces, reporting, and something happened and go, well, give me 2 days, I'll try and figure out if it got stopped and where, and then we'll move on. Everything needs to be part of a whole system, if not from a single vendor, because if you have it part of a system, then you can again maximize that security. So then when you start to look at your security vendors and who you work with, it's very important to look at that ecosystem and say, well, who do you integrate with? How does that match everything else I have sitting on my network right now? And when you integrate, that's great, but how do you integrate? What is that going to do for me to make sure that my security is maximized, and hopefully for the security team, the management is minimized? Because again, you don't want to manage all of those point products separately, individually, reporting and everything else. That's a hiding to nothing.
So it sounds as if you're saying if you have a conversation with one cybersecurity vendor and they say, don't worry, trust us, we can do it all, you've got to be fairly skeptical that that's actually achievable. And it's, as you say, it's coming up with a nice set of integrated solutions from, I don't know, is it likely to be half a dozen, do you think, something like that would give you potentially the right sort of coverage?
I honestly, I think that'll come down to the size of an organization, the vertical they're in, and their appetite to be able to consume that. What I do, I kind of liken this back in the day to UTM, so the Unified Threat Management, where you had your firewall, and then you put all of this stuff on top of it, and on paper it looked great. I've got this one thing that does these 10 things, and I go, well, but then it ground to a halt, and that's not very good. And so we've turned these 3 things off, and I kind of see that same parallel happening again with massive consolidation. It's going to be the point of it looks great until you try and do something, and then you realize the flaws, and then you have to work around it, and it kind of the reality doesn't really live up to the promise.
Okay, and also I'm interested, you mentioned a couple of times about prevention. I mean, clearly, once upon a time, it was all about preventing. You know, there was a very real possibility you could prevent all the attacks and keep your organization safe. Then the dial seemed to move towards the fact that you accept that at some stage you will get breached. So it's how you mitigate that, minimize the impact. And are you perhaps suggesting that in that focus, the prevention bit has been not forgotten, but perhaps, you know, underestimated the importance of that again, and therefore you think it is important that people do actually try and, you know, ring fence as best they can their organization before, you know, accepting that things might go wrong in any case?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think the most important thing, or kind of where we've gone slightly wayward, is that the detection technologies have been put at the tip of the spear, the front door, as it were. So you need to get past my detection to get in. And I think that's the point at which we need prevention. If I can prevent it, I absolutely should. If I can use things like isolation-powered security to get rid of a whole chunk of this, then absolutely I should. And do you know what that means? It means that when you step further down and you start to look at detection, I've got less to look at. I've got less to try and figure out. It's easier for the technology to figure out what's going on. It's easier for the humans behind that because they aren't looking at a whole lot of noise and not a lot of signal that's in there. So you really start to be able to focus. So I would agree that, you know, prevention used to be the way that it was, and then we thought detection was great, and detection is great, and it absolutely is required, and it has its place. I just don't think that place is at the front door, the first port of call for any threats that are coming in. And kind of looking at the prevention side of things, I think the other thing to consider, you know, solutions that might even market the fact that it's updated 30,000 times a day to keep you secure. That's kind of the telltale sign that 30,000 times a day it wasn't good enough and it wasn't going to work, and it needs to be continually updated. And I think, again, absolutely has its place, but it shouldn't be the first layer of defense. And if the first layer of defense is consistent and preventative and not reliant on detecting if something's good or bad, but in fact changing the course, as it were, on the attackers with something that they don't know what it is, where it is, how to get past it, then all of those security teams get to take a breath. They get to figure out what they're doing, and then they can actually come back and say, well, what's the next generation of my security infrastructure going to look like, and how would I do things in this new cyber world?
And maybe fine as well that increasingly the term cyber resilience is being used. Do you think, again, that's a helpful, rather than calling it cyber security, which maybe people just focus on, you know, traditional security solutions, although as you highlighted, there are many different new ways, new approaches to it, and they're including things like, you know, backup, recovery, even cyber insurance. Is it helpful to look at cyber resilience as the sort of end goal, rather than just the sort of silo of cyber security and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's a system, right? It absolutely is. So I've spoken a lot about prevention and detection and everything else, but if the worst does happen, because there's many ways that a piece of malware or ransomware could get in, and at Menlo Security, we look at the web side of things, applications, and kind of the in and out of an organization. But a USB key, an insider threat, absolutely that could happen. What we need to look at from an organizational perspective is exactly as you said, how do we minimize the risk of all of that to the organization? So I mentioned that detection is absolutely required, as is backup and recovery, because when you get that far down the chain, and I'll use ransomware as the example, if you get all the way down and you do have ransomware and it is on your machine and you can't get to anything and you don't have backup and recovery, backup and restore, then that's a huge issue. But that's the point where it's required, not at the front. And so I think it's kind of the order of operations in terms of what do I prevent, what do I detect, and then how do I recover, that will help organizations to maybe look at things in an ordered manner, but look at it in a way where every tool has a job, and that integration that we spoke about is vital all the way through. And then coming back to when we mentioned about the 3 Ps, in terms of your policies and your procedures and your protocols and everything that you have, that you know what does what when from a technology perspective, who owns it, how long it takes, and you can look at it in a systematic way for an organization, rather than having an IT and a security team and end users and kind of never the twain shall meet. It needs to be everything together in concert in order to be as effective as it can be for a company.
And I promised the final question, because you've been very generous with your time, but is it possible, if a company listening to this or just generally thinks, I need to completely reevaluate my cybersecurity, they do a good job and they get all the right framework there, is it possible then they can relax for a period of time, or do they constantly need to reevaluate that and think, oh, actually we need to change it? So how I suppose, how real time does this need to be, or can you do it for 6 months, have a look in 6 months time, then go, okay, this needs tweaking? Just thoughts as to, and again, what's practical, because obviously these people are running businesses and have lots of other things, and clearly security is important, but just how much time, I suppose, do they need to be devoting to ongoing development of their security framework?
So I think there's many answers to that question. So I think the security as a whole should be measured. You absolutely need metrics to figure out if the money that you're spending is worthwhile. What did it do? And as you communicate whatever the spend might be on security to the board of directors, and you kind of up the chain, you need to say, I took X amount of money, I did this with it, this is what we stopped, this is what it would have cost, this is what I've done for the business. So I think that there's certainly a measurement and a metrics perspective there. But to go back to the first point that you made in terms of like, what can you do it for a time and then take a break, evaluate, figure out if this is working? I think the problem with that type of approach is that right now we're losing the race. And so if we think differently, get innovative, we do everything we've spoken about today, we might get back close to them, but that's not the point at which you take your foot off the pedal and slow down again and figure out if this works. So I think there's certainly a time frame that we need to accelerate as cybersecurity practitioners, as vendors, as everything. We've been moving slower and innovating slower than the threat actors have, and so we need to redress that. And I think that shifting from a detection to a prevention model, rather than, well, it might accelerate the innovation on the security practitioner side of things, but it will decelerate what the threat actors can do and help us to get back to a level playing field, and then we can figure out what works from there. So I don't think there's a time to take your foot off the gas and figure out what's going on, but absolutely you need to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate for the amount of money that you're spending on your security infrastructure. But taking that step over from detection to prevention, I think, can help get companies back in the race, as it were, with the attackers that are out there, and start to change the playing field on them, so that we're making them move and adapt and everything, rather than being reactive to everything that they're doing.
Okay, I say you've been very kind to give me the time, Mark, and some fascinating insights. So thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.